Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It is I, Rashbi, and we got this week's Torah commentary, portion commentary on this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is Ekev. This is a very special portion to me because this was the portion for my Haftorah. This was my bar mitzvah, Ekev. And we'll get to that in a minute. But first, a few comments. First of all, a shout out of thanks to Elena Weissman for playing the violin at Friday's service, as she's done for the last few weeks. It's absolutely beautiful. And Jack, glad you're back from your trip. You accompanied us on guitar as well. We had a couple of guitars. We had a violin. It makes for a very, very beautiful service. I don't know if anybody heard that in the background, but this is my bar mitzvah, and as it turns out, Friday night is my birthday, and my wife, the Rebbitzin, will be hosting a special oneg after the service. And since I'm a big chocolate freak, I'm almost dressed in black and chocolate. There'll be some good. There'll be other stuff too besides a chocolate cake, but it'll be fun. So come all, come one, come all. It'll be fun. We'll have a good time. So again, there's been some discussion about having musical instruments at a service. And there's two reasons why very traditional Jews say it shouldn't be done. The first reason is that if it's a string instrument, if you break a string, you may be tempted to fix it, which you don't do on Shabbat. You don't fix, you don't build. That's one of the 39 forbidden malachat that are mentioned in the Torah in Leviticus when Hashem tells them to go ahead and build the Mishkan, the Ark of the Covenant, the tabernacle. But he says, except on Sabbath, you won't. And they lift a whole bunch of things. And they said, okay, well, this is a laundry list of what we do, what don't do on Shabbat. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that we do not have a temple. Now, if as we read through the Psalms, the Sabbath Psalm, as a lot of you know, contains the words, with the music of the lute and the harp. And when a psalm contains a verse that mentions musical instruments, it typically is referring to the instruments that they use, that the Levites used to play those psalms. There was a group of musicians, the Asafim, from the temple that would, specifically the Levites, they were one of the clans of the Levites, and they would do the music when they were singing the psalms. And again, in the ancient temple, every morning they would go through the whole book of Tehillim, all 150 psalms. I mean, they had nothing else. That's what they did, right? That was their job. So they would have musical instruments that would accompany them. So since we do not have a temple, we are considered to be in mourning. One of the reasons why we observe Tisha B'Av is we do not have a temple. The temple's been destroyed. And because we don't have a temple, we want to kind of curtail our joy. We don't want it to be too much. Now, to that, my response is that may all be well and good. And by the way, this is all rabbinical decrees. Okay, I'm a rabbi. I have halakhic authority. And they say that when the sages have enacted something, you really, and it becomes tradition, it becomes part of our rituals, if you will. My feeling is that I like a lively service. To me, to lead a service, to acknowledge Hashem, to acknowledge the goodness in our lives and give thanks for all the good. Yeah, there's some bad, but you focus on the good. You know what they say? What you focus on in your life tends to grow. You focus on the good, it becomes better. If you go to services and there's music, you're going to get more into the prayers. You're going to feel more inspired. You're going to feel that kavod. You're going to feel that connection. And that's really what it's all about. So for me, it's more important to have people enjoy the service and keep coming back and start to integrate all that halacha, all those rituals, all those commandments, like being nice to people, like honoring the stranger, into their lives. So that's kind of my take on it. So Ekev, let's answer a question real quick before we get into it, because basically with Ekev, all right, we have a lot of little commandments where Moshe Rabbeinu says, well, and the gist of it, the theme is kind of like, if you do what you're supposed to do, you will get rewards. If you don't do what you're supposed to do, or you do what you're not supposed to do, then there will be punishment. So we have at the end of the portion, we have the second paragraph of the V'ahavta. Now, somebody asked the question, and I want to get to this. Adi, thank you for your question. Why don't we say Baruch Shem Kavod between saying the Shema and saying the V'ahavta? Why, in fact, is it there if we say it. If we say it in an undertone, we don't say it aloud. Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, Shema and V'ahavta are in the Torah. In fact, we just encountered it in last week's portion. Baruch Shem Kavod is nowhere in the Torah. It's nowhere in the Tanakh. It's nowhere in the Holy Scriptures. It's a midrash that Jacob said that he was blessing his sons, and then when he got done, he said, Baruch Shem Kavod, blessed is the name of glorious kingdom forever and ever, and then he died. So that is put in there, really, to separate the Shema, which is a declarative. We're declaring our allegiance to Hashem, the one and only God. And then we're saying the V'ahavta, which is more an imperative. We're talking about going, attending to the covenant, going along with the covenant, and obeying the commandments. You shall, wrap them on your arm, put them between your eyes, on the gates and on your doorposts, etc. That type of thing. So because it's not in the Torah, and because we use it to separate the two, so it doesn't run into each other. So we just say it under our breath. Now, the next question, well, if that's the case, why do we say it on Yom Kippur? Well, this is also an angelic recitation. So Jacob was in a very high state of purity as he was about to die, and he was able to recite a blessing that was very lofty. That's something that the angels say. So angels are actually a lot holier than us. Yes, we are more important, for lack of a better word, because the angels behave because that's the way they're supposed to. That's how they're made. They're made to behave a certain way. They're messengers. They're there for one reason, whereas humans have free choice. So we really are kind of on a higher level than the angels. Even the angels, because they're closer to God, are more holy. Kadosh, 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 the Kedusha. A lot of that contains angelic recitations. So on Yom Kippur, when we afflict ourselves and are in fact blocking out everything else that's going around us, and just focusing on that spirituality, that's when we attain a holiness that we don't see during the rest of the year. That's when we could recite aloud Baruch Shem Kavod. So having said that, let's continue with what this portion was about. And I said that, and I talked about that. Okay, it's about reward and punishment. Moses Rabbeinu says, when you go into the land, it'll be a little harder. Hashem gave you manna when you were in the wilderness. Hashem gave you water when you were in the wilderness. Hashem gave you meat. Or did he? Remember, Moshe Rabbeinu is about to die. This is the next generation. Why are they using the pronoun you? Why didn't he say, as I told your parents, or I told them, in the third person plural instead of the second person plural? Because we're all in this together. There's a sense of community. Remember, the first paragraph of the V'ahavta, which we saw in the previous portion of the Elchanan, talked about the individual. All the pronouns that said you were individual, and you shall put them as a sign upon your hand and between your eyes and on the doorposts of your gates. Now, at the end of this particular portion, when we have the second, V'haya im shmo tishma'u el mitzvotai, and it will come to pass if you obey this commandment, you get the early rains in its time and the late rains. Because when we're harvesting food, we want to have like a drizzle maybe at the end of the harvest so we can harvest the crops and they get a little bit of nourishment. We don't want a downpour because they'll flood out the crops, right? We want that downpour at the beginning of the season to nourish the crops. That's why we say Yereh Malkush, the early rains and the late rains, in their proper season. That's what happens when you obey the commandments. In fact, when there's a drought in Israel, it's considered to be that the people have sinned, and they're supposed to fast, and there's actually some very specific things that you add to the liturgy, to the Amidah, the silent standing prayer, in order to say, well, we don't have rain, we have a drought because obviously we've done something wrong, so please forgive us, and we're going to make it an extra effort to do what's right. And that's what the second paragraph of the V'ahavta says, V'hayam tishmo, everything's in the plural, because there's a group consciousness when it comes to being Jewish. It's not just an individual mandate, an individual covenant, it's a group covenant. That's why when Moshe Rabbeinu addressed this generation that hadn't been around, that was born after the affair of the spies, that was born, that is coming of age after this other generation has died out, these are the Sabras. The first Sabras, the ones that weren't in the desert, the free people born that are going to go in and take the land. They're going to conquer the land. But Moshe Rabbeinu is saying you. See, so it's because we have a group consciousness. The other thing is this. Think of it this way. And a lot of it is, this is my take. There's an old saying, an apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We are a stiff-necked people. That's a phrase that's used a few times. We're stubborn. We get it. We just don't want to. We want to do our own thing. We're stiff-necked. We want to do our own thing. As a people, we have an identity. We have a personality. A people has a personality. And Moshe Rabbeinu knows this. That's why in the last portion, he said, you're going to settle in the land, you're going to get prosperous, and you're going to forget your commandments. This is what happens when people get prosperous. They say, oh, okay, I prayed, I got what I wanted, I got what I want now, I don't, no need to pray anymore. It's a tendency to forget it. That's why this admonition, and that's why this whole focus on the group. This is what you did. So, since this is what you did, even though you physically weren't there, spiritually you were there, now what we need you to do is, all of you as a group, you need to support yourselves and come together and do the commandments. That's why having a minyan, one of the main reasons why having a minyan is so important. So we all do this together. See? And with that, please come Friday night for birthday oneg, my birthday Kaddish. And Saturday, we're doing a kid-friendly service. But again, I'd like to be able to do my Haftorah, at least some of it, be kind of a trip down memory lane for me. So please indulge me come Saturday. And don't forget to check out my website, www.modernrabbistephen.com. I've got all the old vlogs that I do, the video logs, and also I've been putting down my sermons. I'm even considering, how I do these vlogs. I'm also considering doing this for the sermon, not just the text, but also reciting it. If you have any thoughts, let me know. Leave me a comment or send me an email. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. See you in synagogue. Thanks again for listening.